Hello and welcome to The Bard's Truth with your host, the Green Bard. This is episode 6.6 of the Direwolves of Winterfell, a white wolf and a reluctant watchman, which covers how Ghost and others influenced Jon's decision to leave and then stay in the Night's Watch at the end of a Game of Thrones, in anticipation of a new adventure, going beyond the wall at the beginning of A Clash of Kings. A Game of Thrones, Jon 9. Following Ned's death, when Jon resolved to desert from the Watch and join Robb's army, Ghost plays a pivotal part in bringing Jon back. First, he slows Jon's progress as they initially rode away. Then, once the older boys were close, he made noise to cause them to find where he was hiding. It starts with Ghost obediently coming when called, and then shadowing Jon as he rides off. I have two side notes before we discuss that action. 1. Ghost's eyes like embers are mentioned as they leave the castle, but I am uncertain if there is any meaning to this other than simply reminding us of their hue. Generally, burning eyes is an expression of anger or determination, force of will in this saga. But it might also be about indicating some type of magical event. It could be that Ghost is reflecting Jon's anger or determination, but it also might be an indication that someone else, i.e. Bloodraven, is participating in the scene through Ghost, either passively or actively. Regardless of whether or not George R. R. Martin intended the mention of the eyes as a clue for such, I definitely feel that Ghost made a purposeful act later to derail Jon's mission. He succeeded too. 2. Jon flexes his hand during the initial flight. This happens a lot in the story from prior chapters through later books. Whenever he does so, it conjures up images of Luke and Anakin Skywalker, and probably a lot of other fantasy heroes too, and how both of them had flexed their bionic hands from time to time in the Star Wars saga. I believe George intended this connection. That said, specifically for Jon in this scene, it is symbolic of the tie that binds him to the Watch. It reminds him of the White that he destroyed, which undoubtedly reminds him of the threat posed by the Whites and the others, not to mention the sword that Mormont gave him in the preceding chapter. So, from the very beginning of the flight, Jon is symbolically/subconsciously questioning his own actions. Does Ghost recognize or feel this apprehension and lead him to do the right thing? Or is it some third party that wants him to go back? After thinking of his hand, and with Ghost traveling at his side, Jon slows a bit and thinks about Ned, and then about Robb and the reception he'd get from his half-brother. The obvious questions that are raised only make him more disquieted. Could it be that Ghost is trying to mentally temper Jon's enthusiasm for desertion, or is this all in Jon's head? Either way, Jon is angered at the thoughts and finally breaks into a gallop. Only a half mile after starting the gallop, Ghost slows up. Jon writes it off as the difference between a horse and a wolf's stamina, but a half mile is not very long to run, so count me suspicious. It would have to be a sprint to tire the wolf that much. The mare whickered softly as Jon Snow tightened the cinch. "Easy, sweet lady," he said in a soft voice, quieting her with a touch. Wind whispered through the stable, cold dead breath on his face, but Jon paid it no mind. He strapped his roll to the saddle, his scarred fingers stiff and clumsy. "Ghost," he called softly, "to me." And the wolf was there, eyes like embers. Later, Jon raised the hood of his heavy cloak and gave the horse her head. Castle Black was silent and still as he rode out, with Ghost racing at his side. Men watched from the wall behind him, he knew, but their eyes were turned north, not south. No one would see him go, no one but Sam Tarly, struggling back to his feet in the dust of the old stables. He hoped Sam hadn't hurt himself, falling like that. He was so heavy and ungainly, it would be just like him to break a wrist or twist an ankle getting out of the way. "I warned him," Jon said aloud. "It was nothing to do with him anyway." He flexed his burned hand as he rode, opening and closing the scarred fingers. They still pained him, but it felt good to have the wrappings off. Later, Ghost kept pace with him for almost half a mile, red tongue lolling from his mouth. Man and horse alike lowered their heads as he asked the mare for more speed. The wolf slowed, stopped, watching, his eyes glowing red in the moonlight. He vanished behind, but Jon knew he would follow at his own pace. Jon rides for a while alone, but eventually slows because the horse was tired. During this time, Jon ponders but doesn't feel any better about his decision to desert. He then wonders at his own recklessness with the perilous ride. a metaphor for his decision to leave the watch in general. Jon calls, then worries about the direwolf when Ghost does not return. Ghost may be hunting, but their separation definitely delays Jon. That run had been truly stupid, an invitation to a broken neck. Jon wondered what had gotten into him. Was he in such a great rush to die? Off in the trees, the distant scream of some frightened animal made him look up. His mare whinnied nervously. Had his wolf found some prey? He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Ghost," he shouted. "Ghost, to me!" The only answer was a rush of wings behind him as an owl took flight. Frowning, Jon continued on his way. He led the mare for half an hour until she was dry. Ghost did not appear. Jon wanted to mount up and ride again, but he was concerned about his missing wolf. "Ghost," he called again. "Where are you? To me, Ghost!" Nothing in these woods could trouble a direwolf, even a half-grown direwolf, unless... No, Ghost was too smart to attack a bear. And if there was a wolf pack anywhere close, Jon would surely have heard them howling. He should eat, he decided. Food would settle his stomach and give Ghost a chance to catch up. There was no danger yet. Castle Black still slept. Before Ghost shows up, Jon hears the boys Sam had sent to retrieve him. Ghost delayed Jon enough that they caught up with him. If it were only this, one might think it just a coincidence that Ghost ended up slowing Jon down. What confirms for me that Ghost's delay of Jon was purposeful is how Jon tries to hide, but Ghost runs through the trees making noise, and then causes further noise by frightening Jon's horse. Then, after the boys convinced Jon to come back, Ghost looked at him knowingly. To me, this look is definitive. Ghost's actions were undoubtedly intentional. And remember, Ghost is normally silent, so he made that noise on purpose. "There's nothing here." Out of the corner of his eye, Jon glimpsed the pale shape moving through the trees. Leaves rustled, and Ghost came bounding out of the shadows, so suddenly that Jon's mare started and gave a whinny. "There," Halder shouted. "I heard it too." Later. "Do we have to bind your hands, or will you give us your word that you'll ride back peaceful?" asked Halder. "I won't run, if that's what you mean." Ghost moved out from under the trees and Jon glared at him. "Small help you were," he said. The deep red eyes looked at him knowingly. To me, the only question is whether it was Ghost, and mayhaps Jon's own conscience, driving his actions, or whether a third party, such as Bloodraven, was placing a thumb on the scale. I can't conclude which. Both are reasonable ideas, given the additional context of potential interference by the old gods in our prior chapters. Speaking of, when Mormont confronts Jon about the escapade the next morning, he says one peculiar thing that I think is a piece of this puzzle. He says in the passive voice that Jon was meant to be here. This statement would be literally true in the case of Bloodraven meddling and having brought Jon back. Under that reading of it, Bloodraven would be actively meaning for Jon to be there. Mormont also connects this to Ghost's actions in finding the whites and saving him. What's even more convincing to me is that when I wrote the paragraph above, I hadn't even read the following passage. It makes Mormont's words even more powerful to me. Listen. "Why, the raven called. "All I know is that the blood of the first men flows in the veins of the Starks. The first men built the wall, and it's said they remember things otherwise forgotten. And that beast of yours, he led us to the whites, warned you of the dead man on the steps. Sir Jeremy would doubtless call that happenstance, yet Sir Jeremy is dead and I'm not. Lord Mormont stabbed a chunk of ham with the point of his dagger. I think you were meant to be here. And I want you and that wolf of yours with us when we go beyond the wall." His words sent a chill of excitement down Jon's back. Beyond the wall? Lest you forget, Bloodraven was actually watching that entire scene through the Raven, who we were reminded of at the beginning of the passage. Regardless, with the enticement of going beyond the wall, Jon goes on to reaffirm his loyalty to the Watch, and notably to the Old Bear specifically, setting up Ghost and Jon's plot for the upcoming volumes. And, I think, they're going exactly where Bloodraven wanted them to go. To summarize, in A Game of Thrones, we've seen abundant evidence and suggestive innuendo for Ghost's ability to call out telepathically in a way that we didn't see for any of the other direwolves. This gives a lot of weight to our hypothesis that Ghost is special in that regard, as hinted at by his eye color. There are also strange events when Ghost uncharacteristically disregards or disobeys Jon, possibly indicating interference with their bond. To be clear, Ghost seems to generally be closely bonded to, or of one mind with, and obedient to Jon, making these events the exception, not the rule. Still, these events suggest that a third party may be using Ghost to meddle in Jon's fate. Otherwise, are direwolf themes held for Ghost and Jon's story in A Game of Thrones? A Clash of Kings, a white wolf and an eager, reluctant ranger. In this volume, most of our Stark children have wolf dreams introduced into the plot. It is no different for Jon and Ghost. What is different is that Ghost spends almost the entire story in a Clash of Kings beyond the wall, so we learn from his dream that he cannot sense his pack, despite trying. Jon is initially eager for ranging beyond the wall, and later at the opportunity to range with Qhorin Halfhand, but fear and concern soon overtake this, followed by reluctance and chagrin at having to kill Qhorin. The way that Ghost mirrors Jon's emotions in this volume speaks, well, volumes. We'll also continue to investigate the themes from our prior volumes, including personality and mood mirroring, obedience versus independence, shadowing/protecting/fear of the wolves, related the wolves' innate ability to sense threats, belonging to the pack, the instinct to hunt, being affectionate when they're together, bad things happening when they're separated. Ghost's unique theme of silence, coupled with his associated ability to communicate telepathically, also continues in this volume, although some might think the wolf dream puts that silence into question. The question of their bond being meddled with telepathically by Bloodraven or some other entity also comes up, especially when they're at Craster's Keep, as well as in the Frostfangs, and at the Fist of the First Men. A Clash of Kings, Bran 1. We start this volume, as in many others, with the pack bond. Bran is wondering if Shaggy and Summer are calling to Ghost, Grey Wind, Nymeria, and Lady's Shade. I don't know the answer to Bran's question, but given what we learn in Bran and Summer's story, part 4 of this series, I presume that Ghost can sense them when the others call out. Ghost, of course, can't howl, at least he never does. I also wonder what Ghost thinks of this comet. Summer's howls were long and sad, full of grief and longing. Shaggydog's were more savage. Their voices echoed through the yards and halls until the castle rang, and it seemed as though some great pack of direwolves haunted Winterfell, instead of only 2. 2 where the ones had been 6. Do they miss their brothers and sisters too? Bran wondered. Are they calling to Grey Wind and Ghost? To Nymeria and Lady's Shade? Do they want them to come home and be a pack together? A Clash of Kings, Jon 1. The White Raven of the Citadel is another use of symbolism in Ghost's story. It is very interesting that in our world, the all-black crows and ravens and the all-white doves are used symbolically a lot, especially as harbingers. Negative connotations, of course, go to the blackbirds and positive to the white. The White Raven is kind of a mix of both, so the coming of this raven to the wall, coupled with the comet, is very interesting symbolically. The other thing that's important is that Ghost's appearance, previously connected to the Weirwoods and Bloodraven, is now also connected to the White Ravens. This connection should not be forgotten. I don't think it's important at this time, but it may be important the next time they fly, as harbingers of winter, never a good thing in the north. The mention of the White Raven's silence is also interesting, because some of them do speak, one saying lady to Shireen, for example. So they are not exactly like Ghost in this, although this one does mimic Ghost. They also have black eyes, like other ravens, so they are not considered albino, potentially unlike Ghost. However, they are mentioned as being cleverer than other ravens, which is probably a good comparison to Ghost. I do wonder if they are more special telepathically than the other ravens, as seems to be the case for Ghost. There's a lot there to unpack. Soon, Jon thought as they climbed, he'd seen the harbinger that had come to Maester Aemon with word of summer's end. The great raven of the Citadel, white and silent as Ghost. He'd seen a winter once, when he was very young, but everyone agreed that it had been a short one, and mild. This one would be different. He could feel it in his bones. The steep stone steps had Sam puffing like a blacksmith's bellows by the time they reached the surface. They emerged into a brisk wind that made Jon's cloak swirl and snap. Ghost was stretched out asleep beneath the wattle and daub wall of the granary, but he woke when Jon appeared, bushy white tail held stiffly upright as he trotted to them. So from Ghost and the Raven, the conversation with Sam centers around the wall and then the comet, before settling on Ghost again, all symbols. As the passage goes on, Ghost is shadowing. Never mind about comets, it's maps the old bear wants. Ghost loped ahead of them. The grounds seemed deserted this morning, with so many rangers off at the brothel in Molestown, digging for buried treasure and drinking themselves blind. Speaking of the old bear, special beasts, and intelligent birds, clearly the latter is true of Mormont's Raven, who also has the power of speech, as we see in this scene when he calls Jon by name. While the bird is not the topic of this post, it is definitely worth mentioning that a lot of things that make Ghost special may also be evidence for this bird. In this scene, the bird is seen as annoyingly echoing Thorin Smallwood, who is already annoying Mormont with his opinions. Preston Jacobs suggests that this is partially a way of goading Mormont through the Raven, by Bloodraven, of course. While that is all conjecture, it is certainly interesting to think that the former Lord Commander, Brandon Rivers, is still spying on and manipulating his successors through this bird. As to Ghost, he is mentioned as being left behind at the beginning of the scene with Mormont. His obedience here says to me that he doesn't sense any threat to Jon in the following scene. Lord Commander Mormont had taken up residence in the King's Tower after the fire had gutted his own. Jon left Ghost with the guards outside the door. More stairs, said Sam miserably as they started up. I hate stairs. Well, that's one thing we won't face in the wood. When they entered the solar, the Raven spied them at once. Snow! The bird shrieked. Mormont broke off his conversation. Took you long enough with those maps. He pushed the remains of breakfast out of the way to make room on the table. Put them here. I'll have a look at them later. Thorin Smallwood, a sinewy ranger with a weak chin and a weaker mouth hidden under the thin scraggle of beard, gave Jon and Sam a cool look. He had been one of Alliser Thorne's henchmen and had no love for either of them. The Lord Commander's place is at Castle Black, lording and commanding, he told Mormont, ignoring the newcomers, it seems to me. The Raven flapped his black wings. Me. The bird goes on to annoy Mormont more, but since Ghost isn't in the scene, we won't go further into it this time. And with that, Jon and Ghost are ready to go beyond the wall, which we'll cover in the next several episodes. Above my eyes, but once I watched. Thanks to all the terrific artists who let me use their work on this YouTube video. Songs of love, her bell I'd ring in the window, but lies should sing. It's so lonely. Thanks especially to those of my family who helped in this series so far. It's so lonely neath the shade of the wall. If you enjoy this content, you can also consider supporting us on Patreon.